Shamantal's Day. The goddess of community, generosity and gifts. Wife of Shil and goddess of the sun, the Imperium and ancestor of the Empress. The divine mother of the Shulvanti. The last day of Ivrovi, some time before midnight. 5 hoverbikes quietly rose from the pavement on the darkened street. Gore shook his head when his bike broke the silence and rumbled, "Cheap garbage." The badly tuned harmonics really got his Asayak in a knot. Still, while the deposit was a killer, the rental fee was low and the bike came without a tracker.
"There's something wrong with the gravity shear in this thing."
Gore figured the one good thing about returning to Shil was that once their old contacts learned they were alive, they jumped right into action. Something, fear or respect. Sometimes they weren't entirely different. Either way, Gore was doing a little pathfinding of his own. Unfinished business and all, checking up on some old friends. Just a little excitement. Instead, they came up with an empty house and a couple of people willing to answer their omnipads.
"Hi, Owen. How's it? Yes, the rumours are true. We're back. Yes, I'm still pissed about last time, but... Now, hang on. Even I have to recognize style. What? No, it was still fucking awesome and..."
Gore held the omnipad away from his ear as the outraged yammering went on for a while.
"Yeah, right. Look, if you see what's left of the Hinari family, remind them their parents are sucking the Deep Minder's cock because we sent them there. Okay, love you, sweetie. Bye."
He hung up and taped the omnipad attached to the handlebars. The rental was Shulvanti-sized, and the handlebars were so tall they were head height, but he could make use of the space. Anyway, the omnicalls were as big a bust as their trip to the house. The place looked like it hadn't been touched since their last time here.
"Look at this place!"
Shrek excitedly looked over the decrepit domicile.
"I still think it's gorgeous." "It used to be a men's house," Ratch pointed out. "They had orgies in the living room. It smelled."
Shrek paused and slowly turned to look back at Ratch.
"Okay, it has a storied history. So what? It's a great fixer-upper." "We aren't staying," Gore said firmly. "It's just, if we're back on Shil, we should announce it. I'm thinking..." He brainstormed. "Let's start small. There's got to be a few old enemies left, right? Imagine someone vanishes. They turn up half-eaten."
Far from just a hired thug, Gore was an artiste of carnage.
"Somewhere public, of course. Maybe Orinka Plaza."
Instead of climbing on her bike, Sashan wandered over and wrapped her arms around him.
"Gore, sweetie, love your initiative, but we're here to subcontract for the Natasha. One job, in and out. Just one." "Like you've never caught up on unfinished business."
Gore decided he liked having her lean, muscular arms wrapped around him. He started purring, only semi-voluntarily. The old house looked like it had been deserted for ages, making the whole trip a waste, but the girls made up for it. Sashan rested her chin between Gore's ears.
"Long as we get the job done." "Oh, come on."
Gore shrunk into the hug.
"We always get the job done."
Last time, getting the job done had involved totaling 3 air cars, a warehouse fire, and blowing the bottom out of a rooftop pool, but they had gotten the job done. Besides, the fire was nobody's fault. Shrek climbed onto her bike and stashed away her fencing knives.
"Think we could hang hostages from the ceiling somehow? Just pull out this fan? Maybe add a meat hook?" "Could be fun. Shame nobody was home."
Settling old scores would have been nice, but the place looked like it hadn't been touched. You came into town, called on some old acquaintances, and suddenly there was gunfire, police, and someone wanted to bicker and argue about who shot who. It was irritating, but hey, everybody had been there.
"We definitely got to eat, though."
Gore's stomach grumbled as Sashan let go.
"I'm hungry."
Shul morning. The start of the new year. Dawn hadn't even thought about coming up when Gore crept out for a look around. The Natasha home ship lay about 3 miles away from their employer's house, and while a good third of their warband was somewhere on guard duty, old Lafkia had made it clear there was no room to sleep on their ship. That would have been no big deal. Gore was tired of being on the ship. Worse, ship homes were crowded, and the Natasha had kits running around. It wasn't even that Gore was against having kits running around underfoot. Sure, he wanted to settle down somewhere quiet and forget about everything. Eventually. Just him, the girls, and enough money to never worry about where their next meal was coming from. It sounded good in practice, though patience wasn't always on his side. It was just a case of, not right now. Even so, he had to admit he'd 100% been sneaking a look at Ratch's tits last night. It was, well, practice. Getting a good look at her rack was also one bright spot to an otherwise sucktastic evening. Sure, it was good being off a ship, any ship, but their gear still hadn't caught up with them. The ride out to Corvallo's old menthol house had been a wash, and to top it all off, by the time midnight rolled around, there wasn't anywhere to get a bite to eat. The capital city and crowning glory of the whole damned Imperium, one of the 2 greatest cities in the known galaxy, and what did you get? Not a single joint open after midnight, all thanks to the damned holiday and some stupid period of mourning. The downside of being off a ship was being shoved into the guest house of the Natasha's employer, some old dame. No, wait, she was a duchess. Anyway, they piled into a couple of rooms which smelled dusty, but would have been pretty sweet, if you were a Shorvanti. The oversized furniture was annoying, but the real ass kicker was no food. A whole house all to themselves. Everybody got a bedroom. And yeah, sneaking into Ratch's room for a mutual rubdown would have been great. Except he was starving. All the girls had caught an early bite to eat at the Junkie Hot before going through customs, but Soylent White was just bean curd with junk on top. It was hardly better than emergency rations. They'd been eating the stuff all the way to Shill, which is just what you got for travelling economy, but oh no, we have to maintain a cover. Bean curd. 2 weeks of living on bean curd. Crispy salted bean curd, baked bean curd, pan-fried bean curd with plover sauce. Yeah, you could survive on it, and the stuff kept forever, but who'd want to? The girls were sleeping in without anyone having to stand guard for once, so he let them enjoy it. While teasing Ratch's thoughts to wake her up sounded good, food sounded better, and Gore's stomach agreed. With nothing stocked in the guest house but a variety of teas, he made his way through the twilight darkness up to the big house. The Natasha worked security around the clock, and the main kitchen for the estate was there, so that's where he went. It was the promised land. People could trash talk the Imperium, and sure, he did it, but the Shorvanti had one thing that he loved more than anything else in the whole damn galaxy. Shorvanti-sized refrigerators. Just one could hold enough food to keep him happy for days. It was like finding a treasure chest. And Dark Mother bless their new benefactor. The kitchen had 3. Well, that just figured, didn't it? Big old estate like this was made for throwing big old fancy parties. That meant storing a lot of grub, which meant his having just a bite to eat wouldn't even be noticed. Shards. No one had paid them for anything yet, which meant they were guests. Any proper hostess wouldn't begrudge a starving boy something to eat. Gore started with the dry pantry. There was a selection of grains and grasses fit for a Tory. There was soup stock, cans of things he couldn't identify, and plenty of things he could but didn't want. The great thing about life in the galaxy was so many things to see, but the food... Well, if a planet had a compatible biosphere, you could generally find something tasty, but more often than not, it came across as bland to gross. There were always real gems. Planets where the proteins and polypeptides were just right, but Shorvanti food was okay. The pantries were all dry goods, though, and he was in the mood for some meat. The first fridge was fruits, while the second was mostly just vegetables, but the third one was just right. Gore practically shoved himself inside. The chilly air washing over his fur felt delicious, which was nothing compared to the contents. Job? This was a holiday. There were 2 roasts nestled in between long strings of sausages. There were steaks, chops, bacon, and a big old leg of something he couldn't identify. There was... Gore started at the label on the jar, not daring to believe his eyes. He picked up the jar with reverence and swirled it around, eyeing up the contents. It was! It really was! According to the label, they were even fresh. A whole jar full of Murkher kippers, straight from Pesh. Peshian fish were rare outside the home system, but the Murkher were a delicacy. The fish was a hardy fucker, capable of surviving over a wide variety of anywhere, from the shores to well out onto the ice sheets on Pesh's cold side. They were oily and salty and packed with everything he wanted, sliding over his tongue. Gore opened the jar and sniffed. He'd never been on Pesh before, but every spacefaring race would tell you there was nothing quite like the taste of food from your own biome. You just couldn't beat homeworld cooking, and he drew one out between two claws and opened wide. Bliss. The long spiny fish was about as long as his hand, and he slurped the first one over his tongue. The scales. Oh, the scales! The texture set off the taste in ways that made his tongue so happy it tried to slap his brains out. He'd only had Murkher twice. It was expensive and rare. He wasn't sure which came first, but who cared? He had a whole jar in his hands and he was starving. What else was a boy to do? Gore dove in, happily stuffing in another and downing it without a second's thought. His stomach roared for more at the prospect of finally having something to do. The taste was everything he'd been wanting, and what else was better than one Murkher? Two! Gore sandwiched them together and started in at the head, sucking them in an inch at a time, and... The kitchen light came on, and Gore's head whipped around to see an elderly Shorvanti woman standing at the door in her bathrobe.
Oh crap, it's probably the cook.
The woman regarded him with a bemused smile and cocked her head. Gore looked her over as well. After a moment, he pushed one of the fishtails into his mouth. It bulged in his cheek, but what could you do?
Why, you must be one of the new peasants who've come to stay.
She tightened the sash of her robe as she wandered over to the table and put on the kettle.
Such a handsome young boy, too. Just be cool. If I ask nice, maybe she'll heat something up and... I'm Duchess Varun.
She looked him up and down, then smiled graciously.
Won't you sit down, young man? I'm so pleased to meet you.
And crowds have gathered this morning across the city and beyond to... Laurel waved the remote at the monitor and muted the sound. Tronia could see he was unhappy. 35 million people in the capital alone, and look at them! Hundreds of thousands of people all dressed up in mourning colours for Camaraderie, but they're unhappy. How do they think we feel?
2 periods of mourning so close together is hard for them.
Trinia pushed away the remains of her breakfast and sipped her tea.
You know how they feel for you and the Empress, but this isn't a time of war. Don't fret so. It was still a reasonable Ifrovi. The funeral will be over soon. The crowds will disperse once people get back to work. It upsets Prendy.
Laurel folding his arms sullenly.
She's old enough to know she's dead, but not old enough to know how this affects people. She doesn't understand why people are so unhappy about showing their grief. Camaraderie was difficult, but it's not as if the people knew her. Perhaps, but Camaradrie's holiday address is still fresh in their minds.
Laurel set his shoulders, hunching in on himself.
Try explaining that to a child. When your grandmother died, the people mourned far longer.
Trinia set her tea aside and looked at her husband.
She's a child. She'll learn that it's how people are. Just being a Tasu doesn't mean you're loved beyond any reason, and that address was not well received.
It wasn't her fault. She was nervous, Laurel said defensively. Besides, I'm sure Camaraderie was loved by a lot of people.
She may have been loved, but I doubt she was well loved.
Trinia looked for something to do with her hands. It was only breakfast, and already it looked like it was going to be one of those days.
She might have been dutiful to the public, but people notice these things. It's unfortunate, but there it is.
She was always there whenever Mother called. She just didn't have a chance to shine. Camaldry and Indara must have been swapped at birth. How many times had she pondered that notion? But it wouldn't do to upset Laurel. It did no good, and she wasn't in the mood to start a pointless argument and ruin the morning. She just didn't have a lovable nature. And are we loved? Laurel said. He was usually a gentle man, kind at heart and a good father. The news was clearly upsetting him. I devoted myself to raising our children. I don't do a fraction of the events she did. Being a traditional father is important. It shows family values. Trinia folded her hands and faced him, trying to put an end to the discussion. And I make certain that we're loved, unlike Camaldry, which is why you don't have to worry about it. Camaldry was never loved, but now she's dead. It's easy to love the dead. It was a lie Trinia didn't believe in, much less count on, but Laurel seemed to feel a bit better. He stopped hunching his shoulders and fussed about before refilling their tea. It's just so much to think about. A whole galaxy looking to our family, swearing by us for continuity in their lives when I feel like I don't have any at all. Laurel stopped pottering about and gazed wistfully out of the window. Calandri dead, then dear Aurelia, and our little Suitor. Now Camaldry. Has it occurred to you that one more accident and I could be Emperor? Trinia folded her hands and said nothing. It seemed the wisest course. Much as I love you, there's nothing in the universe that's occurred to you that hasn't occurred to me first. That's the affliction I have to live with. At least it avoided an argument. Things were in motion. Shell or not, she needed to keep them coasting forward.
And I don't know about you, but after a tough day of homicide, unimaginable property damage, and the gruesome slaughter of innocent bystanders, I get so hot and sweaty that I have to cool off by removing my top and going around... No! I'm not some kit anymore. There's no way Gore said that.
Rikishi held her sighs after another fit of laughter.
I mean, that's got to be out of a porn film.
Sunchaser raised her glass to her apprentice.
A good story means giving the impression of your thoughts, conveying the nuances and depth of feeling, right? If you want facts, go watch a documentary. I'm telling you what it was like to be there. I know. I appreciate it.
Rikishi looked ready to break into another fit of the giggles.
It's just the thought of Gore going topless. Just because the target's brains went down his shirt, that's just... it's silly. Well, silly or not, that's what happened. I'm telling you, kid, things just have a way of getting turned upside down with that bunch. But his top?
Sunchaser caught the covetous glint in Rikishi's eye. Ridiculous or not, Gore wasn't that much older, and she caught Rikishi's eyes glazing over now and then. Well, there was no time for that.
It's what happened. Alright, he didn't say that, and maybe he was surrounded by his gals, but it all came down to him being shirtless.
Sunchaser topped up her tea and huffed, her aside shifting back and forth sourly.
There we all were, ready to make a decent getaway, but Gore steps out on the street with no top on, and before we knew it, people start screaming, Sashan lets fly with a bazooka, and next thing you know, the orphanage is on fire.
Rikishi looked less than convinced.
If that's true, why did you call them? I mean, they can't be that bad. Oh, they aren't. They get the job done. If you don't care about the collateral damage, everything's great. Just remember to bathe with that fireproof mousse.
Sunchaser rubbed her forehead. It was too early, but Rikishi was just like her mother, a morning person.
I'm not trying to say the Stone Mountains are bad people. They're just a lot more dangerous than they appear. And that's why we don't mention orphans around Harasiv. Hey, those orphans attacked us first. Everyone saw it.
Sunchaser took another pull from her mug. The tea was hot as a supernova, but it still couldn't burn away the memory.
The Stone Mountains were never what you'd call a big warband, but there's a reason there's only 4 of them, you know?
Rikishi ticked off fingers.
Sashan, Rat, Shrak, and Gore, right?
Raikishi started getting breathy whenever she said gore, and Sunchaser made a mental note to close the deal with past. The 4 kits of the apocalypse weren't children anymore,
and she really needs to get laid. Sure, there are more of them back on Pesh, but here's a secret you keep to yourself. Only one of them went to the big dinner table in the sky that night, and that was Shava. The elders decided they were done, made out like they got killed and vanished. Looking like they're dead and disappearing is practically a Stone Mountain trademark. But that's awful. Why would they leave gore?
Raikishi sat forward on the edge of her seat, and her Asaic flashed with open curiosity.
What happened? Yeah, well, this was a few years back, and Gore was, well, old enough, but not old enough, if you get what I'm saying. Their pathfinder was tired of cleaning up after them. She and her sisters were never closer to Shan's mother, and after she passed, Lornan and her sisters decided they'd had enough.
Sunchaser shrugged.
I owed her one, and she cashed in for me to keep it quiet. Like I said, Stone Mountains have a knack for looking like they're dead. Don't you believe it unless you're watching them cook, and even then you better run the DNA or check for a pulse. But leaving your warband?
Raikishi protested, her Asaic standing up in first-degree declaration.
Oh, to be young and so certain of everything again. Psh, I think they do it just to scare each other. I wouldn't want to think about living with them.
Still, Raikishi was her apprentice, and she listened, which was good. All Persian were stubborn survivors, but stubborn wasn't the same thing as tenacious, and survivor didn't always mean wise. But that was what pathfinders were for. Raikishi was a good apprentice, and everything said stayed between them. She was smart, social, and was learning to be wise, or at least wiser than her band sisters.
And sure, loyalty's important, but not everyone enjoys being labelled a crazed serial killer, you know? But you said they aren't bad people, so they're not serial killers, right?
Sunchaser laughed, raucously.
Nah, that needs intent. I mean, yeah, they're mass murderers, but they're still a lot of fun. Just don't watch Shrek eat.
Sunchaser paused, thoughtfully. The old ship was filled with noises that she'd known ever since they left Pesh. It was home, and she knew every squeak, ping, and groan. Everything sounded just as it should, which meant it was too quiet.
Speaking of which, where are they?
Shrek shook her head in denial.
Gore, I swear I don't understand you. How'd you get into these things? That's easy. Just give yourself a full-body dye job and a lobotomy, Ratch muttered, rolling her eyes. What? You couldn't wait an hour for breakfast? I was starving.
Gore looked at his ladies, and his Asaic drooped under their gaze.
Besides, she had fresh macrae.
Ratch opened and closed her mouth, looking for something to say, but nothing came out. Coming up empty, she settled on scowling at him.
Gore, we adore you, but you can't go wandering off like that. We had no idea where you were.
Shrek wrung her hands, but tried to make herself sound reasonable.
It's been weeks since we could all sleep in.
Ratch huffed.
Did you save any for us? Well...
Gore shrugged helplessly.
I thought not.
Ratch crossed her arms, and her Asaic flipped in first-degree aggravation.
We just started talking the morning away,
he offered. Still, he always came through for his ladies.
Besides, she also has a job.
Patience, young Padawan. Patience, skill, and experience. Tom Steinberg continued racking up his kill streak as the pups ran in terror.
You're wall hacking, Dex shot back.
Do you see a wall hack? Tom showed the pups his screen. I'm just that good, baby! Finding bootleg copies of Call of Duty, ported to Datanet, meant the pups were going to discover multiplayer lobbies, and Tom had been delighted to discover the game's continued ancient traditions from the Modern Warfare 2 days. That being said, he wasn't ready for the pups to discover that rabbit hole yet, so they'd been having some family game nights. Basically just creaming them in Call of Duty. That and a really sweet build. The M200 was just that good, though admittedly, he usually maimed the ACR. He tried to nerf himself by taking the sniper, but admittedly the pups had zero Call of Duty experience. Speaking of, Tom headshotted Amy, ending the match. "Alright, pick your class for the next round." Soon enough, the timer ran out, and the next game started. Tom wiped the floor again, but Amy and Ari pulled a few over on him. Ari snuck a few hits in while Amy had him distracted. After a few more rounds, Tom got up. It sounded like breakfast was ready, so he went to the kitchen and opened the oven, letting the tantalizing smell of a Dixie breakfast cuisine waft through the house. Well, as close as you could get to a Dixie food when it was made with human hands, but the pups liked it. Either way, it was good. Soft, flaky fish, served up with something that tasted like potatoes and a thick, creamy sauce. Tom didn't even bother letting it cool, as he took a bowl and walked back into the living room. "Breakfast is ready!" "Finally!" The kids stormed the kitchen like it was D-Day. As they ate the thick, slightly breaded fish, Tom took his and slipped out. As he made his way to the shed, he considered the task at hand. This was going to be a lower-yield bomb, thanks to its mix of flour and, well, he hadn't had diesel fuel, but he did have gravcar fuel. He'd supplemented it with a little fuel-air mix, like the last bomb, but a little something extra this time. As he poured nails and ball bearings into jars, Tom thought over his target profile. While shrapnel was good for casualties, Tom briefly considered another form of target instead. The kind with lots of delicate equipment. Yeah. The thought of a bunch of nails tearing through some dedicated server, or some pricey hardware and costing a company a ton of credits for the cost of repairs, felt good. It was a paid gig, so there was no harm in enjoying it. Tom filled up more jars. Alright, this was a specific hit, but Jabba was pretty easy to deal with. Most of the time letting him pick his own targets. To be fair, she may have asked for something with lots of casualties, but he was thinking big picture. Hell, what he had planned was barely a crime. Given the target, it might even take the authorities a while to figure out it wasn't just an accident, so it hardly counted. Definitely no worse than nobles stealing money from millions. Alontel considered the scope of the disaster over breakfast. So far, things seemed, well... Blessed Nyosa, Heli, and Thoria, this is a disaster. Zatara was honing her snark with her jailer, Desala. Thank goodness the girl gave as good as she got. Between their brewing rivalry, the regatta, and checking on the sea lance at the marina, she was occupied. For now. Citri and Kalai, on the other hand. Citri Vida was a known quantity, like a comet passing close to a planet. If left to her own devices, and depending on what was going on around her, she could put on a magnificent display that would entertain and amaze all who saw her, or she could hurtle into the ground, creating a planetary disaster. A small nudge one way or the other would make the difference. Citri seemed to be having a wonderful time over breakfast with her jailer, Sephir. As far as fast friendships went, the pair seemed to be bonding over workout routines and stories of near misses and injuries. The tall ale girl was well connected, clearly intelligent and motivated. A pretty woman with an ardent desire to be a doctor, Sephir had the makings of a perfect co-wife, but that required a husband. For now, thank the goddess, Sephir was keeping Citri busy. Last night over dinner, her tail had been twitching, and that was a good sign. The best tell for how the irrepressible Urbian was feeling was her body language. There were 3 tells he catalogued. The first was an ear twitch that meant, "It's fine, thanks. Your attention is not required." The second, puffing her cheeks, was infrequent, but clearly meant, "I am now actively upset but refusing to show it, though I want to draw your attention to this abysmal state of affairs before I start kicking something." The third, and unquestionably the worst, was the foot stomp. Incredibly rare for her, it meant, "You are about to experience escape velocity with the help of my foot." Of Andy's 2 present suitors, Kalai was, as usual, the hardest to read. She showed nothing except a genuine interest in Sephir's family pharma business, and a determination to make the best of things. If Sitri was a blazing comet, Kalai was a prelther on a pond. Oh, she hid everything away. She always did, the poor dear, given what Andy had told him of the secret she kept from casual acquaintances. It was a miracle she could be so strong, but her resolution was an act, but a convincing one for anyone not aware of what was keeping her afloat. Goddess love her, but when Kalai got into a funk, you'd never know until it broke her. Andy had implied that something had gone wrong on Earth, and that she wrongly blamed herself. Whatever it was, it continued to gnaw at her, and that still wasn't the worst. The worst part of all was that friend Dandy was having a good time, and both of his suitors were distracted. He was even singing again. Curse all the fates! His plan to nudge his escort to Lady Deshin's company was too perfect. How could it have been otherwise? Yet now friend Dandy was snared in the fiendishly cunning net he'd cast. It wasn't his fault. Who would have imagined that Lady Deshin was actually Cousin Kalira? Clearly, the Imperial Palace had provided her with an elaborate cover, secreting her cover identity as a humble woman of grace, but low standing even amidst the august company of her peers, and with a human no less. Given his connection with friend Dandy, the artful disguise was nothing less than a revelation. It was a sublime deception worthy of a true mistress of intrigue. Doubtless, a Vascon was behind it. The whole arrangement made perfect sense. True, he'd had the eyes to see Deshin for who she was. Vascon women sometimes wore veils with traditional garb, and any boy knew how to recognize their mothers. He wanted to scream. It was her voice, there could be no doubt. Andre was a Cilician noble, but that nobility did not meet imperial standards. At best, Kalira would merely charm friend Dandy with her courtly wiles, drawing him in and beguiling his senses as only a princess of the royal line could achieve. In the worst case, she would simply use him before dismissing him utterly. It seemed improbable that she would be cruel to him as a human. Despite her cover, she'd appear to have real affection for Professor Warwick. A bond of friendship with the Pelafons, as well as her obvious guardian, Captain Tonnis. Regardless of her intentions, friend Andy would be destroyed, humiliated, humbled. The only way out would be if he could somehow undo the sublime intrigue he had set in motion. Yes, to split the pair apart before the irreparable damage could be done to him and his reputation, to say nothing of Kalai, Sitri, and his other suitors. This will need special consideration. Only my very greatest effort will save friend Andy from the effects of my little game. It would simply have to be done, and no matter how daunting. Hopefully he would still outdo himself. Anyone else might become overwrought. In the meanwhile, breakfast was over. All there was to do to go see his jailer, Professor Ramirez, which had a terror all its own. Tom mulled over the email to Garnia and checked the attachments twice. He was fairly satisfied with his explanation. A USO dance was a social event between troops and local members of the opposite sex. It served as a morale booster from the period he was about to teach, and yes, it was 100% harmless fun. There hadn't been any message from Hope Clarson. Belle's announcement over dinner that she, Pris, and Liam were eventually going to be husband and wives met with wild enthusiasm from the girls. There had also been polite, even keen interest from the Rhythm kids, while Mavere and Solani had been all smiles. Tom made a note to check on Andy later. The three Rhythm girls had exchanged looks that went from speculative to appraising to predatory in about 2 seconds flat. The memory made him shake his head. Still, cultural exchange with Vascon or no, Shulvanti were still Shulvanti. Of course they want to go with How to Catch a Human. It's a bestseller, unless you're a peasant reading How to Serve Man. The Urbian girl had looked genuinely enthused, but each of the Rhythm girls had cast a glance Dess's way. Likely they were nervous about Tis Uku. Even if they weren't going to carry him off in pieces after playing tug-of-war, they probably didn't want anyone else getting their hands on him. The attachments were photographs he pulled from his classwork. After all, it was a USO dance. The Chavanti loved uniforms, and Fabbers made costumes a breeze. Dressing the Ale girls as Wax and the Rhythm girls as Wrens seemed like a good compromise. Allies and all that. While he didn't understand all the overtones of the captive exchange, a dance at the end of the week seemed like a good olive branch. As for the boys, well, the Zoot suit was awful, but it was correct for the time and place. He hit send and looked over his inbox. If Rovey was over, and whatever magic wand the Imperium waved to turn off spam, it was back to the same old routine. The pile of electrons filling up his inbox wasn't bad, not really, but 2 weeks off from anything but close friends had been nice. 2 weeks without any junk cluttering up his inbox was like a vacation. And now it was back. It wasn't spam in the worst sense. Somehow the Imperium had conquered that particular demon, and there was no doubt that it was a real boon to quality of life. But the mail was still irksome in terms of volume. In his opinion, most email was like someone clearing their throat, clamoring for attention. Every time one arrived in your inbox, it lurked there, just waiting to drain your time and energy. There were occasional notes from friends and his sister back home. Rarer these days, but he treasured every one of them. As far as practical matters, Miv received copies as the matriarch of house, while matters like Solani's operation went to them all. There were messages from the Ministry of Education. Important, but Mivere got them too. Anything obscure, he just asked her what it meant and usually rolled with it. The Chavanti were serious about education. They believed in taking care of the future by educating the youth of today. Still, it was a problem. Despite having infinite resources, there weren't infinite credits. Education was still a focal point where older generations, kids out the door and grown, and the legions of unmarried women, with no kids, converged in a head-on maelstrom with parents and administrators in a battle of who got what. It was self-interest at its finest, and while the Imperium followed elegant principles for education, it wasn't always that clear in practice. There were messages from various news outlets, though we usually forwarded those to Mavisti Roche. Between her worries over Nestor's grades, unfounded, and the prospect of keeping a hook in him for future use, the media mogul sucked it up. Her email was probably filtered by 3 secretaries before anything reached her, so it seemed like a fair trade. And then, there were some things you had to read to believe. I don't believe this. Tom pushed his omnipad away and saw the delicate cant to Miv's head, while Lani did so openly. Maybe it was just a matter of perspective, or maybe it was just a gift from the Tau. They just finished a holy day for nudists, but it seemed the universe hadn't run out of surprises. This production company is pitching a musical about the singing human professor, and it reads like some monstrous cross between the Flying Nun meets The Sound of Music. Mivere looked at him thoughtfully, setting aside her plover. And I'm telling them no! Not just no, but hell no! York even! Miv steepled her hands and rested her chin, looking at him thoughtfully, while Lani took it all in. Ranting about it seemed better than explaining the Flying Nun. I'd rather tell them not to threaten me, and that I know a Dixie lawyer. What I'd rather tell them is that the second star to the right and straight on to morning is where I want them to go fuck off. But you love music, Mivere said diplomatically, though her smile teased him and Lani chuckled, picking up on the joke. I hum, I don't sing, and I definitely don't perform. You did the other night. Miv's tongue snaked out like a cobra performing for a snake charmer, while Lani turned several shades of blue. She laid a conciliatory hand on Lani's arm. Now, dear, he's all yours until you go back on duty. Tom watched the two exchange satisfied smiles, though Lani still looked nervous, which made him blush. Anyway, no. Whatever you say, dear. Tom ignored the snickering and went back to scowling at his email, pulling up the next one. It was a proposal about the travelling exhibit on humanity. Garnia was open to the idea, and with Andy helping Desi at the exhibit, there would probably never be a better time to get something organised. The proposal even has a suggestion to make things really pop. They want to go and get the Voyagers. Of course they do. Why settle for a copy of the record when you can have the real thing? The notion wasn't so far-fetched. By Imperial standards, the pros were so much space junk. As a gesture from humanity, they'd probably do better as museum exhibits than floating off in the void. But the idea made his head hurt. I think I'm going to drop by and see Jama. Aluntel tugged at his surcoat, after accepting a fresh cup of tea from Professor Jimenez. It was Cambrian, and could probably strip reactor shielding, but he sipped, smiled appreciatively, and apologized to his stomach lining. Quite delicious, sir. Thank you. Mm-hmm. It was a staggering improvement compared to and certainly better than Jama Jimenez was not the man he'd been expecting. Before leaving home, his aunt Zedalia made mention of the man. She blushed and giggled. His aunt was a proud woman, and he'd never seen her do either. Father said Jimenez was an inveterate seducer, a Lothario and a philanderer, all of which had piqued his curiosity, but for the life of him he couldn't see it. His contacts had only mentioned the man maintained some sort of connection to the hospitality industry. Absolutely nothing he'd heard jibed with the daunting gentleman brooding at him from the depths of his leather chair, hooded eyes regarding him with reproach. Yet for the life of him, Aluntel couldn't understand why. Things had gone well enough at his initial introduction, there in the depths of the Ale Museum, where the professor seemingly dwelled. He'd been entirely on his best behaviour, as the professor was his designated jailer, which had earned him the rather dry, He'd voiced his deep appreciation for the professor's time and taken him away from his endeavours, which were doubtless of the greatest interest to someone. Dead races had never been his forte, but he'd even complimented the outstanding holograph of the Ujaran in the foyer, which earned him the He'd given his most courtly explanation as to his presence, and his team from Rhythm, as they readied to sail in the coming week against the doubtless very fine team from the Ale, who would certainly comport themselves well, which gained him the Thus far, complimenting the tea seemed his greatest success, and Aluntel tried not to nurture his growing dismay. This promised to be a terrible waste of time when he desperately needed to contrive some way to split friend Andy from Princess Kalira. The time passed with the occasional sip of tea. In hopes of escape, he slipped in a harmless remark about friend Andy, explaining his gentleman-in-waiting was all alone and might need his help. Jimenez leaned forward.
Aye? A human as your gentleman-in-waiting, you say? I do not think I see the like of that, and there's more than one of your kin as roll over in her grave to hear it.
Pardon? Aluntel clutched his tea, which was a mistake as it was blisteringly hot. Recovering his poise, he sniffed. I don't know whatever you could mean, sir. Mr. Sheklerset is a perfect gentleman. He's mostly well behaved.
Oh, chai. Mostly, is it?
One cannot hold his political outbursts against him, nor his vocal defence of his people. Besides, he's been the best friend a man could ask for. Aluntel struck a pose to maintain his dignity. After all, a slur on friend Andy was a slur on his choice. Jailer or no, there were surely limits. Jimenez's sudden interest was startling, and Aluntel inwardly cringed at his instinctive defence of his friend. Oh no, not again. I keep forgetting they don't know his reputation up here. He rallied, centering himself before speaking in a calmer manner. I consider my friend to be a model of gentlemanly conduct and a man of honour. I believe humanity has endured a simply scurrilous slander with regards to their violence. Andre is a shining example, and has only ever acted in self-defence or in defence of others who could not protect themselves.
Ah, do you know, lad? Do you now?
Jimenez leaned forward out of the gloom of his leather chair.
Did you know humans attacked the Imperium first?